Hello, I'm Lloyd Hawkeye Robertson, president of the New Enlightenment Project. Responding to the critical challenge of our times, namely fragmented and polarized discourse, the New Enlightenment Project provides education on the enduring qualities of reason and compassion which define humanism. We promote engagement through open discussion and free debate with other humanists, and we advocate for the application of new Enlightenment values and skills to modern conditions. Few things are more central to the human condition than sexuality and gender. And so it is my pleasure to bring to you today a conversation about women, gender, and trans identity with feminist and journalist Meghan Murphy. Ms. Murphy has faced multiple attempts to silence her in Toronto, Vancouver, Seattle, and elsewhere, despite her message of reason and compassion. We at the New Enlightenment Project are pleased to offer a forum for her views in the interest of diversity of thought in the public square. Through open dialogue, we can act as a catalyst towards positive forward progress. Our guide for this important conversation is New Enlightenment board member Joann Robertson. Joann is a longtime humanist and past president of the BC Humanist Association. So without further delay, I give you Meghan Murphy in conversation with Joann Robertson.
I had a kind of plan in mind originally, but in the last week or so, several things have happened that I'm hoping will be the beginning of some change. And those things are, and I find these on YouTube usually, the major media never seems to cover a lot of anything very important. So I haven't seen much notice there. But one of the videos I saw was politicians in Britain and Australia being asked to define woman. And none of them would do it, which I think is very interesting, because I suppose they're afraid of how they might be attacked if they did such a terrible thing. So I would like to know your opinion on that. That's one thing that's happened recently. Another one is Ron DeSantis in Florida having a dispute with Disney, which is very interesting. He is now passed legislation where children from grades 1 through 3 will not have any gender education. And Disney is objecting to that. Apparently they've even, they used to say, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and they don't even say that anymore because that's, I guess, too obvious. So now they just say, welcome, everybody. So everybody's avoiding any mention of, I'm going to call it sex. I'm not going to call it gender, because that's essentially what we're talking about is biology. So that happened. And of course, the medical profession is now talking about chest feeding instead of breastfeeding, and pregnant people instead of pregnant women. And I'm wondering, and I wish the major media would pick up on this, if there's beginning to be a change. And I wanted to ask you what your opinion was.
Well, I mean, I think to start, the politicians refusing to define the word woman is obviously cowardly,
Yes.
obviously dishonest.
Right.
And, you know, these people are, I mean, arguably all politicians are liars. That's a cliche, but something as overt as defining woman, everyone knows what a woman is. Everyone knows that a woman is an adult human female. So
Right.
to publicly deny that you have no idea what a woman is means that you're publicly okay with either appearing to be stupid or appearing to be a liar. So either way, I think
Yes.
it's pretty bad. And, you know, they're fearful of doing this, of course, because they're fearful of being labeled transphobic.
Right.
Nowadays, to understand what a woman is or what a man is makes you transphobic.
Well,
We're
nobody
supposed
asks
to
what a
pretend
man
as
is.
though these things don't exist. It's true. We don't go around
No,
asking people to define man, and
No.
the word man itself is not what's been erased from the lexicon in the way that woman has,
That's
wherein
right.
we're no longer allowed to say that women are the only ones who get pregnant, women are the only ones who menstruate. We have to use terms like, or we're expected to use terms like menstruator and pregnant people.
Yes.
Even the word mother has become offensive, apparently,
Right.
because it implies that only women can be mothers, because of course only women can be mothers.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, it's all rather pathetic, isn't it?
It is. It is very pathetic and so dishonest in every way.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I'm trying to recall. Oh, you asked if I thought things were changing. I mean, things are changing. It seems like more and more people are willing to speak out, at least against this nonsense. And in particular, it seems like the issue of women's sports and whether or not males who identify as transgender should be allowed to compete with and against women in sport. This seems to actually really have kind of galvanized people to speak out. And, on its face, it just is such an obvious joke that people just aren't tolerating it.
Well, I wonder if how much impression was made by the picture of Leah Thomas, 6'3", standing against the women that he beat in the swimming. It's so blatant there.
Right, exactly. I mean,
and that's
it's
had
something that you
widespread
can
notice.
see. So,
Yes.
So for people to look and see this big hulking man,
Right,
in various contexts, the Leah Thomas one was an obvious one, but there's also been males who competed as female in weightlifting,
yes,
in cycling. There was a male named Alana McLaughlin who fought in an MMA fight, mixed martial arts fight, against a woman and won, and he was a mediocre fighter, but he was a man.
And they
he
praise
choked
these
her
men,
out.
or these so-called women get praised by everybody, and aren't they wonderful? They're breaking barriers or something.
Yeah,
Very annoying.
It's celebratory. They're so brave to compete against people who are weaker than them. But yeah, to see Leah Thomas physically, so obviously a man, to compete against women and to cheat. Essentially what he's doing is he's cheating.
Right.
And people aren't taking it. In the mainstream media, perhaps in the so-called liberal media, they're accepting this. They're not challenging it. Some are celebrating it. But in real life, most people are going to say, no, this is ridiculous. No, this is wrong. No, this is unfair. And those kinds of people are starting to speak out. And, at the beginning, when we started talking about gender identity, like I've been fighting gender identity ideology and talking about the negative impacts on women's rights, the harms to women and girls in particular, since 2015 or 2016 or something like that. And you weren't allowed to speak about that, and very few people were talking about it. So it was sort of easier to silence us and shut us down then. It was just some women and some feminists who were talking about this, Julie Bendel, the Jeffries, Leah Keith, Jenna's Raymond, 1979. But the women who were trying to speak out about it when this kind of legislation was coming up, that would make it legal for men to change sex purely based on self-identification and nothing else. It was easy to silence us and vilify us and shut us down. But now that more and more people are starting to speak out, it's harder to silence everyone. So people are feeling more emboldened to say something.
Yeah. But I did notice on Women's Day that Justin Trudeau mentioned trans-identified women in part of his congratulatory, whatever it was, little item that he put out, which is totally enraging to me. And I'm sure many others, but I wonder how many people really noticed that.
Well,
and
I
thought,
mean, those of us who are paying attention certainly
yes,
notice.
but I'm,
And he's been doing this for some time. It
oh,
was the
yes, of
Liberal
course.
Party of Canada who introduced the Canada's gender identity legislation, Bill C-16 at the time, and
that's right.
and pushed it through and refused a debate.
Mhm.
And
You were involved in that.
essentially, yeah, I testified at the Senate in Ottawa against that bill. Again, warning about the impact on women's rights and arguing that this ideology in and of itself is very sexist and regressive. These are sexist ideas. The idea that what it means to be a woman is to like wear a dress or have long hair. And that if you were a male and you liked so-called girl things, like if you're a boy and you prefer pink and dresses and playing with dolls, and that's what makes you a girl, which is this is what feminists have been fighting against for decades now, to say, you can be a girl, but like, boy things, you can be a girl and you want to play with trucks or roughhouse or play sports or cut your hair short, or, you don't have to like frilly things. And now it seems like everything's reversed.
Well, I don't know if I read something or heard something recently about a gay man in London who is concerned about little boys who may show effeminate characteristics being surgically turned into women. And he started some kind of group acknowledgement or something of that, which is really good. And there was talk of him too also aligning with women, because it's part of the same issue. Is that children aren't now being allowed to develop as they are as lesbians or gay. They're being pushed into physical surgery and drugs.
Right, exactly. And I mean,
child abuse.
Yeah. And what they've found is that a lot of the girls and young women who are believing that, they're in fact boys or, trans men, that these are just young lesbians. They're girls that don't conform to these heterosexual, sexist stereotypes of what it means to be a girl. They're not feminine. So they believe that they're boys, and their bodies and their lives are being destroyed in the process. And they're just kids, they shouldn't be making these kinds of decisions that will impact the rest of their lives, and, they shouldn't be, they're being rendered sterile essentially. And like when I was 15 or 16, I wasn't equipped to decide whether or not I wanted to give birth or have kids down the line. They're minors. And I mean, as far as I'm concerned, these surgeons and these doctors should be sued. You're right. I do think it's child abuse. It should certainly be illegal.
Sweden has changed their approach to this quite recently. And I was listening to something too about the the Holland Protocol, the Netherlands Protocol, which started a lot of this gender changing. And that's being questioned more now than it had been. So I'm hoping that all of this will make more people aware of the damage that's being done to children and to women.
I think so. I mean, I think people are beginning to wake up to it, but the problem is that this ideology and these policies have been institutionalized. So while the rest of us may be looking at this and being like, what's happening? This is crazy. This is dangerous. This is wrong. People like Justin Trudeau, people in power, people in government, people who are running academic institutions, the health system, and now organizations like Planned Parenthood. These institutions have all accepted and promoted this ideology and are not backing down.
No, they're not. But I was also doing some research on that, and they are getting money from things like the Arcus Foundation grants, and then knuckling down to what the Arcus Foundation, what their policies are, which is to totally integrate transgender into the society in every area. There's a lot of money behind the movement.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of organizations, NGOs, charities whose funding is dependent on them accepting this ideology. So in order for them to get their funding, to get grants and so on and so forth, they have to accept and promote transgender ideology and say that, trans women are literally women, and, start using these gender neutral terms. And certainly can't challenge or critique or oppose any of this.
So it's a bigger issue than just being a woke issue. It's now backed by
it's
money.
Not just right. Yeah. And I mean, it's funny that corporations, banks, like Amazon, like Facebook, like Twitter, like these really wealthy corporations are supporting and promoting this ideology and shutting down and vilifying and silencing people who oppose it. And yet the left continues to pretend like this is like they're taking some sort of radical, brave stance, challenging the dominant narrative, when in fact, of course, this is the dominant narrative. This is the enforced ideology. This is the new religion, and those who don't go along are heretics.
Yes. That's why I'm hoping with what's been happening, I see a little tiny bit of movement that might bring change. But as long as the mainstream media avoids the problem entirely, not enough people are aware of what's going on. I think that's a problem too.
For sure. And because the mainstream media and because journalists have gone along, and journalists are now reporting on men using the she pronouns, whether that's about like a man competing in sport who identifies as a trans woman, or whether even it's about violent criminals. They'll report on men in prison for assault or even sexual assault or molestation, and they'll use she pronouns. So most people will be reading an article thinking this is a weird thing for a woman to do. These are not normal woman crimes. Women are not generally the rapists. They're not usually the child molesters. Sometimes that happens, but mostly those kinds of violent sexual assaults are perpetrated by men, and they're being reported on as though they're women. And so it's normalized it to the point where people do feel like they have to go along. And that it really is bad or cruel or dangerous or somehow harmful to point out that these men are male, to call them he. And that's weird, right? Like it's not an insult to refer to a man using the pronoun he. It's a neutral thing. It's you're male. There's nothing you can do about it. Nobody's oppressing you by saying that. You should, as a man, be able to, wear dresses if you feel like you want to wear dresses, or makeup, or grow your hair long. You shouldn't have to act in masculine ways. But that doesn't change your sex. No. And it's so crazy how they've managed to really, it's almost as if somebody's playing a joke on us.
Yes.
And we fell for it.
Yes.
Some did anyway, not us.
Right. I don't know how we can combat this very effectively. I mean, people like you have been speaking out for some time. And I would encourage anyone who's listening to this to get Meghan's Feminist Current, which comes out every week and has information about what's going on.
Right. Yeah. So that's feministcurrent.com. And we publish articles regularly, not all of which, but many of which deal with the issue of gender identity and its impact on women and girls. And we also do a monthly podcast where we interview women and feminists and writers and academics and activists and researchers and authors from all around the world. And we have dealt a lot, for sure, more than any other website in Canada, I'd say, over the years, around trying to educate people about what's going on and to fight back against the gender identity issue. I mean, I've been really lucky to have had my own website, because you couldn't publish anything critical about
Oh,
this
no.
issue anywhere in Canada. You still can't.
No.
I back when the Liberals had presented Bill C-16, and I was trying to like raise the alarm and say, you know, this is gonna hurt women. This is gonna impact women's rights. We can't have gender identity and sex. We can't protect women's sex-based rights if we believe in gender identity. And I couldn't get published anywhere. I finally was able to publish an article at the National Observer, which is, you know, not a huge platform, but at least it was a sort of mainstream news platform in Canada. They wouldn't pay me. They were like, fine, we'll publish you, but we're not paying you. And I was like, okay, fine. But, you know, all of the other places that I'd published at in Canada, the CBC, the Globe and Mail, those kinds of places wouldn't publish a thing
No.
that was critical.
And they
about
still
this
won't.
bill. No, and they still
No.
won't. Exactly.
No.
And though many of those publications have in fact vilified me since, you know, the Globe and Mail published libel about me, and the CBC's libeled me, and really just in general refused to cover this issue fairly.
Yes.
And so they're certainly culpable in terms of what's happened since then, and what's continuing to happen to women and girls and kids who have been caught up in this ideology in a really, really destructive
Yes,
way,
it is.
in terms of, you know, being put on puberty blockers and hormones and sometimes getting surgeries that have destroyed their bodies for life.
There's more coming out about that too, slowly. But again, if the mainstream media doesn't pick up on this, people aren't aware of it. And
I mean, you have to look for it, right? And that's how a lot of people found out about it. But you're right. If you're just, you know, listening to the CBC, I'm not sure where you're located, but the CBC.
I'm in Vancouver.
Oh, okay. So you know what I'm talking about. I wasn't sure if you're a Canadian or American for some reason.
Oh yeah, no.
But I mean, most people are just listening to the CBC or reading what's being published there, or, you know, what's being published, you know, in the Globe and Mail, those kind of places, CTV News, Global. And you would have no idea. You would have no idea that there were being men who are transferred into women's prisons and perpetrating assaults against
that's
those
right.
women. So the media won't report on that. The government won't deal with it. Again, it's just been some women and feminists who have been fighting back about this, some of whom are, you know, ex-inmates.
Yes, I'm aware of all of that. I've given some support to COSPA for that reason. Yeah.
And so those women are talking about what's happening inside those prisons and fighting back, and you know, being completely ignored. And it's incredibly dangerous. I mean, women in prison are some of the most marginalized women in the entire country.
Right.
The kinds of women who end up in prison are the most marginalized women in the country. You know, they're women who are poor. They're women who often have histories of abuse, histories of, you know, sexual molestation. Women who are dealing with pretty serious mental health issues, addiction issues, and then they're in prison where they have no rights and no voice. They're completely marginalized, and these women are being housed with these violent criminals, these men who are claiming to be women, and the government's doing this to them. You know, Justin Trudeau is culpable for this. And,
There's a recent
and the media is refusing to report on it, and they know it's going on too, and so they're culpable as well.
There was an interesting incident in Scotland recently, where a woman in a women's ward in a hospital was claimed she had been raped, and it was denied because there were no men in that ward, which of course wasn't true, because there was a trans identified woman in the ward, but it was denied by the officials because there were no men in the ward, according to the official line.
Right. So
that kind of thing happens.
Raped?
Yeah.
I was reading some columns by this woman, Amber Jackson, who's writing from prison in the US. And she was writing about how at one point they were issuing condoms in the prison,
Yes.
you know, to prevent STDs and probably pregnancy as well. And actually the women in prison fought back against that because they said that, you know, if they were raped, then there was no evidence. So the condoms were being used to disguise the fact that rapes were happening by these male inmates who had been transferred on the basis that they were women.
Right.
You know, it's really disgusting stuff.
I know you haven't been in BC for a while, but now people on their official ID cards are allowed to put their gender down so that there's no truth anymore about women, real women.
Yeah.
It's completely blurred.
Yeah, I think Joe Biden over in the US.
I loved your column on Joe Biden. It was good.
Yeah, I mean, he's really
he's become part of the whole woke thing. The only hope in the US is the Republicans are the ones standing up for the rights of children and women.
I know it's really been kind of strange and interesting, right? Because I come from the left.
Yes, well, so do I.
Yeah, I've always been on the left. I've always voted for the NDP. And, you know, only within the past few years, I was like, wow, the left is really messing up. You know, they're the bad guys.
Yes.
And that's not to say that everything that they're doing on the right is a good thing or that I agree with it all. I certainly don't. But the right are, you know, the only ones who are fighting back against this legislation in any case, you know, fighting to ensure that it's not legal to trans kids to get gender identity out of schools, fighting to keep men from competing against women in women's sports, you know, and talking about the dangers to women and girls it's really strange to see that you know, this isn't a partisan issue. And it's like, we can't as women, as feminists, as anyone, we can't just pledge allegiance to the left and stick with them because that's what we've
absolutely
always done,
not.
or because we've decided that the right are our enemies, because clearly the left are our enemies.
That's right.
The right might be our enemies on certain issues, but I mean, I don't really like to think in those black and white terms, but it's like, if the left is doing bad things, then I'm not with the left.
There's so much more polarization
out of habit.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. So we live in difficult times, but I'm hoping that there's beginning to be a tiny ray of light on this topic.
But, I mean, there's change that's happening in the UK. The feminists in the UK have been quite successful, in fact, in terms of fighting back against gender identity legislation and ideology, and they've been a lot bolder, I would say, than you know, the Canadian women on this front. And in the US, you know, in the US, it's funny because it really depends on where you are. If you're living in Texas, there's progress and there's hope. But if you're living in San Francisco, not so much.
No, not at all, actually. Yes.
But at least, you know, there's politicians who will engage you on this issue and listen and fight. You know, there's a lot of politicians. In fact, I just spoke with a woman in Texas, Michelle Evans, who got into politics pretty specifically over this issue. You know, she had a daughter who was, you know, she, you know, came out as lesbian essentially, but she wouldn't come out as lesbian. She was like, you know, maybe I'm pan, maybe I'm bi, maybe I'm a boy. And, you know, she was quite upset by what was being taught to the kids in these schools against the parents' will. You know, the parents didn't even know or have a say. And the fact that their kids were being taught that, like, you know, maybe, you know, oh, if this boy is wearing a dress, maybe he's actually a girl. Like, oh, you're a girl who seems different, maybe you're actually a boy. You know, it's quite a homophobic ideology.
It is very,
they've lumped
very
it
much.
in with the LGBTQ, et cetera, et cetera. You know, they've tried to frame trans rights as gay rights. There's no such thing as trans rights. I mean, I don't know
No.
what they're talking about when they say trans rights. They're talking about the right of men to enter into women's change rooms. That's
Yes.
not your human right to do that.
Exactly.
But there's no right that trans identified people don't have. Trans doesn't even mean anything, right?
No.
Like this is just a feeling.
Mhm.
And so Michelle Evans has really been fighting back against this, and there's a lot of politicians who are doing good, who
Mhm.
in the past, 5 years ago, I would have thought, oh, I can't have anything to do with these people, they're right wing. So
Yes.
dealing with this issue has really changed my mind about a lot of things politically, and about, in terms of free speech, and in terms of opening my mind up, and not seeing things in such black and white, such binary ways.
I agree with you. We have to change our thinking about left and right, and these labels that have been useful in the past but aren't any longer because they're not working. They're not working.
Yeah, they're not necessary. They don't make any sense, and they aren't doing anything for us.
Yeah,
Who cares what
that's
side
right.
you're on? We're fighting for what's right. It doesn't matter what you call yourself.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, and we can't expect to agree on everything anyway. I don't expect, if I'm talking to somebody about gender identity, that they're going to see things the same way as I do in terms of, abortion, for example. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. If there's somebody on the left who won't fight back against gender identity legislation, and I don't agree with them on, some other issue, that's great. Like I'm not going to refuse to speak to or work with somebody just because we don't see the world in ways, or we have different priorities on certain issues.
Right. The only thing I do is I write letters. That's about all I can do. And there's a column in the Vancouver Sun just the other last week, I think, was praising Leah Thomas. And I immediately wrote to the columnist and pointed out what was wrong with gender ideology in terms of women. He actually responded. He didn't necessarily agree with me, but I hope I opened his mind a tiny bit.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's definitely important to challenge these people and in strategic ways. I tend to think that arguing with people on social media probably doesn't help much, but I do think that, talking to politicians, writing letters, talking to people one-on-one, doing anything we can do. Like I know a lot of people, I've gotten very frustrated in the past about people refusing to speak out publicly about this because it made the rest of us who were speaking out seem much more marginal than we actually were. But, everyone doesn't have to go public with this. I understand that people feel afraid of losing jobs, and people feel afraid of being attacked and ostracized. Yes. And that does happen. I've been attacked and ostracized and threatened, and, I can't get a normal job at this point,
no, you've been attacked many times.
Yeah. So, it's true, but there are things for the people who don't feel like they can speak out in public, who don't want to go on social media and talk about this. That's fine. You can set up a meeting with your MP. You can write a letter. You can explain why this issue concerns you. You can go to your school. You can set up a meeting with the principal, with your teacher. You can talk to friends. You can write letters to the editor. There's a lot of people who think things and don't say them out loud. So you don't know. Yeah. Maybe you're dealing with somebody who's also questioning this and thinking, I'm not so sure about this, or maybe this is wrong. And having that opening where you talk to them and then make them feel as though they can speak about it as well. That can help as well.
Well, there's a case right now in Ontario. A little girl was told by her grade 1 teacher that she was not really a girl. And the little girl was very upset, went home to her parents because the teacher was spouting the transgender ideology with grade 1s and saying that the teacher said there weren't really any girls or any boys. Right. There's a bunch of people in the middle. And the little girl at home, very,
confusing.
very upset, told her parents about it. They went to the teacher. The teacher would not agree to change the program or anything. They went to the principal. The principal said, no, no, the teacher is perfectly within her rights, blah, blah, blah. And they'll be taken to court now.
Great.
So it'll
That's
be
good.
interesting to see what happens
Yeah.
on
I mean,
that.
a lot of these matters are going to be settled in court,
Yeah.
I mean, sadly, because I wish that it just hadn't happened in the first place, but I think
Yes.
that's how the tides really will turn.
Mhm.
Is that, people are going to get sued for transitioning kids, for example. The doctors, the surgeons, the therapists, maybe parents, people are going to get sued.
Mhm.
These kids who have been trans are going to sue,
Right.
or the parents will sue.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I would like you to keep on doing the work you're doing.
I'll
I
try.
encourage you.
I'll keep at it.
I think we all have to, in whatever way we can. Those of us who understand what's going on, male or female, we have to speak out.
Yeah, everyone does. I mean,
Yes.
I think that it's an issue that does primarily harm women and girls.
Yes, it is.
I know a lot of men have been taking up this fight and speaking out, and a lot of men have been braver in some ways than women in speaking out. So I agree with you. Everyone should do it. It's
Yes.
something that matters quite a great deal, and we've gone so far down this path. I really hope we don't go any further.
Yes. Well, it's been good speaking to you, Megan. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so
enjoyed
much
this.
for having me. It was great to
Yes.
connect with you.
Yes. And it was good to see you too. So as I said, keep it up, and we'll all do we'll do the best we can. All of us, I hope.
I hope so as well. Thank you for
Yes.
your work.
Right. All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Megan.
Take care.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That was a great interview. Thank you, Megan, for your insights on this difficult topic and for the implications it has for humanism. We agree with the need to form a coalition, uniting people who support science, reason, and even common sense from the excesses of wokeism. The New Enlightenment Project is committed to increasing civil discussion of difficult and controversial topics. Listeners can visit our website at nep-humanism.ca or catch our podcasts and webinars at YouTube at nep-humanism.ca. Thank you for being part of this, and have a good day.